You know, um, you know that person in your social circle who is just an absolute undeniable angel?
Oh, yeah. We all have that one person.
Right. The one who remembers every single birthday. They volunteer for the tasks literally no one else wants to do, covering shifts without complaining. They're just fundamentally a quote-unquote good person.
Mhm.
But then if you look closely at their actual life, it's just this constant miserable string of bad luck.
Yeah, their finances are always in ruin or their relationships are just perpetually draining.
Exactly. They're always exactly one unexpected inconvenience away from just a total collapse. And it's a deeply uncomfortable thing to witness, honestly.
It really is.
Because, well, we are taught from the cradle that virtue is supposed to be rewarded, right?
Right.
We're taught that if you put others first, the universe or society or some invisible scale of justice will eventually balance out and hand you this beautiful life.
Right, but it's the ultimate social conditioning. I mean,
Yeah.
we operate under this collective assumption that goodness is a
The
currency.
currency, okay, yeah.
Yeah, the belief is that if you deposit enough selflessness, enough compliance, and enough empathy into the world, you are basically building up this cosmic bank account.
Oh, wow.
And eventually, you'll be allowed to make a massive withdrawal in the form of an extraordinary, fulfilling existence.
But it doesn't actually work that way. So you have this vast multitude of people waking up every single morning, desperately trying to do everything right.
Hmm.
They have these expansive, beautiful visions for their lives. They want to start revolutionary businesses or create breathtaking art or just, build a life of complete financial and emotional autonomy.
And they attack that goal with just relentless positivity.
Right. They recite their daily affirmations, they visualize their success, they meticulously craft their routines, and they bend over backward to ensure they are never stepping on anyone's toes while they do it.
Which is exhausting.
Completely. They shoulder the emotional weight of their entire peer group.
Hmm.
But despite this overwhelming intensity of effort, they remain completely, paralyzingly stagnant.
The reality never shifts.
Never. The dream stays suspended on the horizon, completely out of reach. So today, we are exploring a paradigm shift that attempts to answer this incredibly painful paradox.
And it's a fascinating one.
It is, but I have to warn you, if you're listening to this, the premise we are looking at is completely counterintuitive.
Oh, absolutely.
It suggests that the very thing keeping you anchored to mediocrity, the literal chain holding you back from that extraordinary vision, is your unyielding dedication to being a good person.
Yeah.
And to actually materialize a reality that defies the odds, you have to actively embrace the identity of a bad person.
Which, that is a statement that immediately triggers a massive psychological defense mechanism in almost anyone hearing it.
Oh, I bet.
Because our entire survival framework is built on avoiding that exact label.
Right. My immediate reaction when looking at this concept was just intense skepticism. Like, wait, hold on.
Naturally.
We're essentially saying that generations of human ethics, the golden rule, putting others first, communal support, that all of that is actually a psychological trap.
Well, it's about context.
But if everyone drops their empathy to become this radically autonomous bad person, doesn't society just collapse into pure sociopathy? How does this concept justify the idea that we need malice to succeed? It sounds like we are drafting a training manual for supervillains.
It sounds like that because we are applying an ethical lens to a mechanical process.
Okay, explain that.
To understand this, we have to completely redefine what we mean by morality in the context of creating your reality. We have to stop looking at good and bad as measures of human cruelty or malice.
Right.
Instead, we have to recognize them as structural frameworks, as energetic and neurological frequencies. We're not talking about causing harm to others at all.
Oh, I see. So what are we talking about?
We are talking about the mechanics of conformity versus the mechanics of radical autonomy. When society labels someone a good person, they are rarely evaluating their soul. They're evaluating their friction level.
Their friction level. Okay, wait, unpack the mechanism there. How are we defining goodness if it has nothing to do with fundamental human kindness?
Well, within the context of group dynamics, goodness is essentially a mechanism for control.
Yeah.
Society defines a good person as someone who stays in line.
Ah.
It means avoiding doing anything that disrupts the established equilibrium. Your primary unconscious objective becomes making others comfortable. And most importantly, it means remaining infinitely relatable.
Infinitely relatable. Wow.
Right. So when the collective looks at an individual and says, they are such a good person, what they're often subconsciously communicating is, This person does not threaten me.
Oh, that makes sense.
They do not challenge my own limitations. They reflect my own current reality back to me in a way that makes my nervous system feel completely safe.
I need to push back on this a little bit, though, because isn't cooperation the literal foundation of human survival?
In a historical sense, yes.
Right, like evolutionary psychology tells us that we survived because we formed tribes, we shared resources, and we cared for the sick. Cooperation is an evolutionary advantage, so why are we framing it as a mechanism of control that ruins our potential?
Because cooperation for basic survival is a completely different mechanism than the pursuit of an extraordinary, anomalous life.
Okay, fair.
Yes, in the distant past, the tribe needed cohesion to survive the harsh environment. But the rules of the tribe are designed to maintain the baseline, not to elevate the
To
individual.
maintain the baseline, right?
In fact, in a rigid tribal structure, an individual who suddenly decides to innovate or hoard extra resources or act completely independently is a literal threat to the cohesion of the group.
Because they're rocking the boat.
Exactly. The tribe's instinct is to suppress that individual to maintain order. Now, we no longer live in those ancient environments, obviously, but our neurological wiring is exactly the same.
That is so true.
We still equate disrupting the group with getting exiled,
Yeah.
and our primitive brain equates exile with physical death. So what we call being a good person today is often just our ancient fear of exile masquerading as modern empathy.
Let me try to ground this in a tangible reality because it feels like this societal version of goodness is like trying to pilot a highly advanced supersonic aircraft while firmly tethered to a fragile white picket fence.
That is an incredible analogy.
Right. You have this massive, roaring engine, which represents your extraordinary dreams, your vast potential, the life you actually want to build.
Yes.
You fire up the engines, you are ready to soar into the stratosphere. But your primary concern, your ultimate paralyzing fear, is that the intense heat from your jet exhaust might singe the neighbor's perfectly manicured landscaping.
That is an incredibly accurate visualization. You are prioritizing the structural integrity of the neighborhood's emotional comfort over your own flight.
Right, so what happens? You never actually take off.
You stay grounded.
You just sit in the driveway, revving the engine, making a tremendous amount of noise, doing your daily affirmations, reading all the self-help materials, and convincing yourself you are, working on flying.
Yeah.
But you never lift a single inch off the ground, all while ensuring the fence remains perfectly intact and the neighbors are undisturbed.
And we really have to look at the underlying psychology of why you are tethering yourself to that fence. It is the fear of success.
Not the fear of failure.
No, we spend an enormous amount of time analyzing the fear of failure, but the fear of success is infinitely more potent because it is intimately tied to the fear of outshining others.
Oh, wow.
If you fail, the tribe pities you, but they keep you. If you succeed, if you become an anomaly, you threaten the entire social order.
Because you're proving it can be done.
Exactly. The moment you strive for a life that exists completely outside the norm, you risk the ultimate societal punishment. You risk being told that you are doing too much.
Oh, that phrase, doing too much. I mean, it is rarely said as a compliment. It is almost always a warning.
It is absolutely a behavioral correction tool. Think of the societal landscape like an old wooden floor. When a singular floorboard buckles and a nail stands out, extending higher than the rest of the surface, what is the immediate instinct of the homeowner?
You grab a hammer.
Right. The instinct is never to elevate all the surrounding floorboards to meet the height of the new nail. The instinct is to take a hammer and violently pound that nail back down into flat, seamless alignment.
That's a brutal image, but so accurate.
Society fundamentally craves the flat surface. It craves predictability. When you step out of bounds to pursue an extraordinary reality, you become that protruding nail. And the people around you, very often the people who care about you the most, will immediately bring down the hammer.
But why, though? If they care about you, shouldn't they want you to succeed? I mean, why are they swinging the hammer?
Because they aren't swinging the hammer out of malice. They are swinging it out of cognitive dissonance.
Oh, okay.
Your elevation highlights their stagnation. If you prove that escaping the mundane reality is possible, it forces them to confront the painful realization that they have chosen to remain trapped.
So it's easier to just stop you.
Much easier. It is much easier for their psychological preservation to convince you to come back down than it is for them to do the grueling work of climbing up.
Right.
This is where your repetitive rituals, the affirmations and visualizations, become completely hollow. They're entirely powerless if your underlying subconscious goal is to avoid the hammer.
Wow.
You can chant all morning about abundance. But if your neurological baseline is screaming, stay flat so you don't get hit,
Yeah.
your brain will literally filter out every opportunity for success.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that filtering, because
Yeah.
this is where I think people get lost in the metaphysical concepts, right?
Sure.
If I am genuinely trying to succeed, but I am unconsciously afraid of the hammer, how does that actually prevent me from achieving my goals? Like, is there a physical process happening here?
Yes, there is. It happens right inside the brain's filtering system, often referred to as the reticular activating system. Your brain is bombarded with millions of bits of information every single second. It cannot process all of it, so it filters the environment based on what you deem most important for your survival.
Makes sense.
If your deepest subconscious program is, I must remain relatable and avoid outshining my peers to survive, your brain establishes that as the ultimate directive.
So it's literally blinding you.
Exactly. So when an incredible opportunity presents itself, a chance to take a massive risk, a controversial but brilliant idea, a connection that could elevate you, your brain flags it not as an opportunity, but as a threat to your social survival.
So I literally won't even perceive the opportunity. Or wait, I'll perceive it and immediately find a rational-sounding excuse to avoid it.
That's exactly it. You will self-sabotage, and you will call it being realistic.
Oh, that stings.
You will procrastinate, and you will call it waiting for the right time. You will compromise your vision to make it more palatable for your peers, and you will call it being a team player.
Wow, you do the work of the hammer for them.
You do. And this brings us to how this trap of goodness specifically manifests in our daily emotional lives. If goodness is merely staying in line and avoiding the hammer, it shows up as a desperate, almost suffocating craving for shared experience.
A craving for shared experience.
It shows up as the magnetism of mediocrity.
The magnetism of mediocrity. I want to illustrate this with a deeply relatable scenario, actually, because the psychology here is fascinating and, honestly, a little dark.
Let's hear it.
Let's look at the mechanics of failure. Imagine you are taking a massive, incredibly high-stakes examination, the kind of test that essentially dictates the trajectory of your professional future.
High stress.
Right. You sit down, you open the booklet, and it is a complete disaster. You cannot answer the questions, with absolute certainty that you have failed spectacularly.
Yeah, terrible feeling.
You walk out of that testing room, and the emotional devastation is immensely heavy. It feels like a physical weight pressing on your chest. Your mind is racing with the consequences of your inadequacy.
You are experiencing acute isolation right there. The pain is magnified because you believe you are suffering alone.
Exactly. You feel entirely isolated in your failure. But then a peer walks out of the room, a friend of yours. You look at them, hoping for some kind of solace, and they just shake their head, look at the floor, and admit that they failed completely too.
And then what happens?
And in that exact fraction of a second, something incredible happens. A profound, almost intoxicating wave of relief washes over you.
Yes.
The physical weight on your chest vanishes. You still failed. Your future is still entirely in jeopardy. Nothing about your material circumstances has improved. Yet you are standing there in the hallway, smiling.
We have to unpack the underlying mechanism of that relief because it reveals everything about human limitation.
Please do.
You must ask yourself, why does another person's failure alleviate your suffering? You aren't genuinely happy that your friend failed. You don't want them to fail.
Right, you're not a monster.
Exactly. But you are profoundly, deeply relieved that you are not standing alone in the abyss. That unconscious desire to relate to the struggles of others, that desperate need for shared misery, is a fiercely self-sabotaging frequency.
Wow.
By choosing the comfort of relatability, by allowing that wave of dark relief to soothe you, you are actively choosing to harmonize your neurology with mediocrity.
It's like the concept of crabs in a bucket. But we always misunderstand that metaphor, don't we?
We do.
We think the crabs pulling the escaping crab back down are doing it out of spite or jealousy.
Yes, which is a total misinterpretation of behavioral mechanics. The crab pulling its peer down is not malicious. It is panicking.
It's panicking.
It is in a highly stressful, unnatural environment, and it is desperately reaching out for anything it can grab onto to secure its own footing and survive.
Yeah.
It inadvertently drags its peer back into the trap because it is terrified.
That makes so much sense.
That is exactly what human beings do with shared failure. The warmth of the shared experience, even if the experience is terrible, is biologically more comforting than the freezing cold reality of standing entirely alone in your potential.
So if we extrapolate this behavior over a lifetime, what happens? Because, one failed test isn't going to ruin a life. But we are talking about a chronic craving for relatability.
Well, when you continually surrender to the frequency of the masses, it creates an unstoppable behavioral momentum. Reality is not a series of isolated events. It is an accumulation of choices based on your neurological baseline.
Right.
A solitary spark of conformity doesn't just fade away, it snowballs. You compromise your grand vision today so you don't alienate a skeptical friend.
Yeah.
You downplay your ambition tomorrow so you don't make a complacent colleague feel insecure. You actively hide your joy and success the next day so you don't outshine a sibling who is struggling.
So you are systematically dismantling your own life to build a cozy shelter in the mud.
Precisely. And before long, that snowball becomes a massive avalanche of average living. You wake up one day, look around at the vast, featureless landscape of your life, and realize you have entirely abandoned your extraordinary potential just to ensure you have company in the trenches.
You traded the absolute peak of the mountain for a crowded trench.
You did.
And the most insidious part of this entire dynamic is that society will enthusiastically applaud you for making that trade. They will look down at you sitting in the mud, covered in your own compromised dreams, and they will say, look at them, what a good, grounded, relatable person.
He's rewarded.
But this brings up a massive question regarding human motivation. Why are we so desperate for this company?
It's a great question.
Like, what is the invisible force that compels an intelligent, capable human being to make this terrible trade? Because no one consciously wakes up and declares, I would like to trade my boundless potential and my one wildlife for a permanent seat at the table of mediocrity.
Nobody says that.
Right. There has to be a deeper psychological mechanism forcing our hand.
There is a mechanism, and its power lies in the fact that it operates entirely in the shadows of our subconscious programming.
Okay. What is it?
It is an invisible parasitic agreement that every single human being implicitly signs at the very dawn of their existence. We can refer to it as the social contract.
The social contract. Now, in political science, that usually refers to giving up some freedoms for state protection. How are we applying it here?
We are applying it to evolutionary psychology and emotional survival. The terms of this unconscious contract are brutally, terrifyingly simple.
Okay.
The collective agrees to provide you with affection, a sense of belonging, and the safety of the group. But they will only provide these things in exchange for one highly specific currency, your absolute conformity to the baseline.
Wait, let me challenge this. When we analyze what truly dictates and controls human behavior, the immediate universal answer is fear. We think of fear as the ultimate dictator of our actions. It is like a loud, terrifying alarm bell that rings in our nervous system and forces us to jump into compliance. We assume people conform because they are terrified of the unknown, terrified of financial ruin, or terrified of outright physical danger. Are you saying fear isn't the primary driver?
Well, fear is incredibly loud. You are entirely correct about that. It demands immediate attention because it is tied to acute physical survival.
Right.
But love, specifically, conditional love and social acceptance, is the vast, silent ocean current that truly dictates the long-term direction of our lives.
Oh, wow.
If fear is the sharp alarm bell that makes you flinch, love is the water you were completely submerged in. You do not even realize the current is relentlessly pushing you in a specific direction until the exact moment you try to turn around and swim against it.
Love is a mechanism of control. That is an incredibly heavy concept. It almost sounds cynical, honestly.
It is not cynical. It is a clinical observation of human development. Think about the dawn of human consciousness in infancy. A newborn infant is not born with an inherent fear of failing a business venture or a desire to be mediocre.
Obviously not.
But an infant quickly learns a fundamental law of emotional physics. When they act in accordance with the expectations of the caregivers, they are showered with affection, warmth, and sustenance.
Right.
But when they step out of bounds, when they throw a tantrum, when they become inconvenient or difficult to manage, that affection is immediately, tangibly withdrawn. The physical temperature in the room seems to drop. The silent treatment begins. The subtle signs of disappointment register in the infant's highly sensitive nervous system.
And to an infant, the withdrawal of a caregiver's affection isn't just a minor social inconvenience, it is a literal death sentence. An infant cannot survive without the caregiver.
Exactly.
So the brain wires the concept of disappointing others directly to imminent physical death.
That's the core of it. We are subconsciously programmed from our earliest, most vulnerable moments to believe that our biological survival depends entirely on the conditional love of the collective.
That's terrifying.
The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, does not distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and the disapproving glare of a peer group. It fires the exact same stress hormones.
So we carry that infant terror into our adult lives. We want to initiate a massive career pivot or move to an unfamiliar continent or dedicate our lives to an obscure art form. We have the logical capacity to do it.
We do.
But we subconsciously sense that the massive ocean current of conditional love is going to pull away from us if we take the leap. We sense that the tribe will withdraw their warmth.
Yes. And the fear of losing that conditional love, that deep-seated terror of social isolation, is the strongest, most restrictive chain on human consciousness.
Stronger than the fear of failure.
It is infinitely more powerful than the fear of going bankrupt. We will endure immense chronic suffering. We will stay in deeply miserable circumstances. We will willingly accept a tiny fraction of our true potential, all just to maintain the steady, predictable drip of conditional affection from our environment. The social contract dictates that if you ascend beyond the comfort level of the collective, you are breaking the agreement. And the punishment for breaking the agreement is the withdrawal of love.
Okay, let's explore the friction of breaking that contract. Let's say someone is listening to this conversation right now. They suddenly recognize the alarm bells, they feel the pull of the ocean current, and they decide, enough, I see the mechanism. I am officially severing the social contract.
A huge moment.
I am no longer trading my potential for conditional affection. I am moving toward an extraordinary life. What happens in their reality the moment they make that decision? Because I have to assume the collective doesn't just smile, applaud their autonomy, and wave goodbye.
The reaction is visceral. The moment you make that concrete decision, the moment you actually begin to shift your behavioral frequency away from the established baseline, a massive emotional immune response kicks in.
An immune response?
And it is violent. But the most dangerous part is that the initial attack doesn't necessarily come from the outside. It comes from within.
From within. You are saying your own psyche begins to attack your new vision, like an autoimmune disease of the mind.
That is a perfect analogy. The paralyzing psychological force that emerges to stop you is known as survivor's guilt. And this mechanism is especially potent, almost overwhelmingly so, if you originate from circumstances of extreme survival.
That makes sense.
If you grew up in a challenging socioeconomic neighborhood, a highly dysfunctional family dynamic, or a marginalized community, the roots of this guilt are incredibly deep. As you begin to actively design a life beyond the default settings of your origin, as you start accumulating resources, peace, and success, you will inevitably outpace your peers.
And that contrast gets sharp.
Very sharp. The stark contrast between your new reality and their continuing struggle becomes unavoidable.
And that is when the guilt sinks its teeth into your nervous system. You look back and realize you are breathing clean air while they are still suffocating.
You have to understand that your old reality is not just a passive memory stored in your brain. It acts as a living, breathing entity that fiercely fights for its own preservation.
It fights back.
It does. When you attempt to leave, it attacks your emotional center by weaponizing your highest virtue, your empathy.
Oh, wow.
You begin to look back at the people you're leaving behind, the friends still complaining in the break room, the family members still trapped in toxic cycles, and you feel terrible.
Yeah.
You feel a profound, aching, debilitating guilt that you are successfully escaping the trench while they remain covered in mud. The internal monologue begins. Who do I think I am to have this boundless, beautiful life when the people I love are still struggling so deeply?
I see the absolute trickery of the human mind here. This is brilliant and terrifying. The mind essentially disguises a prison guard as a moral compass.
I love that framing. Explain how you see that playing out.
Well, you feel this intense guilt, and you interpret it as proof that you are a deeply empathetic, caring, good person. You think, I'm feeling this pain because I love them. But in reality, you are just letting the prison guard lock your own cell door and swallow the key. Your empathy is being hijacked by your fear of isolation. You aren't actually helping them by feeling guilty. You are just destroying your own escape route.
That is an exceptional synthesis of the dynamic. This guilt is absolutely not a sign of your elevated morality. It is a frequency trap.
A frequency trap.
And this brings us to the most crucial mechanical aspect of shaping reality.
Right.
Reality matches your frequency. And when we use the word frequency, we're not talking about magic.
Right.
We are talking about the measurable, intense combination of your dominant thoughts and your underlying emotional energy, which dictates your neurological filtering and your physical actions.
So break down the mechanics of the guilt frequency. If I am feeling survivor's guilt, what is actually happening to my momentum?
Well, if your emotional energy is steeped in the heavy, low resonance of guilt, you are outputting a neurological and behavioral signal of lack, of suffering, and of limitation.
Even if I'm doing my affirmations.
Even then, let's say you are meticulously doing your morning affirmations. You are visualizing that supersonic jet taking off. You are intellectually demanding success. But if your underlying visceral emotional state is a deep, quiet panic that says, I feel fundamentally guilty for having the audacity to fly, what do you think happens?
I would assume the conflicting signals cause a massive system failure.
Exactly. The mechanical structure of reality does not respond to the empty words of your affirmations. It responds to the immense gravitational weight of your guilt.
Wow.
Sitting in that heavy emotional resonance completely neutralizes all your forward momentum. It literally collapses the probability of your desired future reality and violently drags you right back to the starting line.
How does that collapse actually manifest in the physical world, though? Does the universe just drop an anvil on my head?
It is far more subtle and self-directed. You subconsciously self-sabotage to relieve the pressure of the guilt. You suddenly forget to follow up on the most important email of your career. You inexplicably pick a fight with a vital business partner. You decide to make a wildly impulsive, terrible financial investment that wipes out your recent gains.
And why?
Because your subconscious mind is desperately trying to alleviate the crushing weight of survivor's guilt by putting you back in the mud with everyone else. You engineer your own failure on purpose so you can feel the dark, comforting relief of relatability again.
That is staggering. We will literally destroy our own masterpieces just to ensure we don't make the people in the gallery feel bad about their own lack of talent.
Precisely.
So, if being a good person, which we have now established is really just a synonym for a compliant, guilt-ridden, entirely relatable person, triggers this paralyzing trap of self-sabotage, then the only logical mechanical path forward requires a complete and total identity shift.
It does.
We have to willfully and consciously become what society deems a bad person.
Yes. To permanently break the gravity of the old reality, you must embrace the identity of the bad person. But again, we must define this with absolute precision, so it is not misunderstood as an endorsement of sociopathy.
Please clarify that.
We are not defining a bad person through the lens of malice, cruelty, deception, or a desire to cause harm to others. We are defining a bad person through the lens of radical, unapologetic autonomy.
Radical, unapologetic autonomy. Okay, I need you to give me the complete anatomy of this so-called bad person. How does an individual operating from this frequency actually walk through the world? How do they make decisions?
A bad person, in this specific context, does exactly what they want to do. They refuse to conform to the arbitrary, suffocating baseline set by the collective.
They don't ask for permission.
Exactly. They do not ask for permission to elevate their circumstances. And most importantly, this is the critical axis of the shift. They entirely cease to carry the emotional burden of other people's discomfort.
They drop the weight of other people's unmanaged emotions.
Completely. When you begin to materialize an extraordinary life, when you step out of the trench and start climbing the mountain, you are inevitably going to make the people around you incredibly uncomfortable.
Because of the shadows.
Yes. Your brilliant light is going to cast harsh, unavoidable shadows on their self-imposed limitations. A good person looks at those shadows, feels guilty, and immediately dims their own light to make the shadows disappear and restore the comforting darkness.
What a bad person.
A bad person lets their light shine at maximum intensity and allows others to take personal responsibility for dealing with their own shadows.
That dynamic reminds me of the absolute most terrifying, gut-wrenching phrase you can ever hear from your peer group when you finally start succeeding and changing your habits.
With that,
It's that moment when a friend looks at you with this tone of profound, heartbreaking disappointment and says, "You've changed."
oh yes,
It is usually delivered as if you have committed high treason against the relationship.
it is delivered as an accusation, and you must make complete, unwavering peace with that phrase. You have to entirely reframe how your nervous system receives those words.
How so?
When the collective looks at you and accuses you of changing, it is not a condemnation. It is empirical, measurable proof that you are successfully shifting your frequency.
It's a sign it's working.
Exactly. If they look at you and say, you haven't changed at all, that is a massive red flag. It means you are still outputting the exact same energetic product code that has kept you stagnant your entire life.
So their discomfort is not my responsibility to fix.
Their discomfort is merely a psychological projection of their own perceived limitations, violently bouncing off the rapidly expanding surface of your new reality. It has absolutely nothing to do with your moral standing.
I understand the logic of this perfectly, but how does an actual biological human being survive the visceral loss of that collective love? We established earlier that the fear of losing that conditional affection is the heaviest chain on human consciousness.
It is.
It is tied to our infant survival instincts. Abandoning the desire for that love feels like taking off a heavy, suffocating lead-lined diving suit while standing at the bottom of the ocean.
That's a powerful image.
You have worn this restrictive suit your entire existence. It is heavy, it limits your vision, you can barely move your limbs, but it has kept you alive under the crushing atmospheric pressure. Taking it off feels completely unnatural and utterly terrifying. The freezing water hits your skin, you feel entirely exposed, and every instinct screams that you are going to die. But taking it off is the only possible way to finally swim to the surface and breathe actual oxygen. How do you tolerate that initial agonizing shock of isolation?
You tolerate it by confronting your reality with a brutal, uncompromising question.
What's the question?
You have to look at the people whose approval you are desperately clinging to and ask yourself, is the conditional love of this collective a love that explicitly requires me to remain small, stagnant, unfulfilled, and suffering? Is that love truly worth dying in the exact same circumstances I was born into?
Wow. Is the love of my captors worth dying in the cell?
Exactly. True liberation requires a life built by design. The absolute default setting of human existence is thoughtless conformity and basic biological survival.
Right.
If you want to live by design, it means you have to fundamentally redesign the architecture of your own mind. It means proactively building the internal psychological fortitude to tolerate extreme isolation.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. You have to undergo the painful realization that the affection you are so terrified of losing was never actually love for you as an expanding, limitless being. It was merely love for your compliance. They loved the version of you that did not challenge them.
Love for your compliance. That completely shatters the illusion. It fundamentally changes the landscape of how we view relationships.
It really does.
If we can actually manage to strip away this parasitic social contract, if we can endure the freezing water, take off the diving suit, tolerate the acute isolation, and finally stand completely alone in our radical autonomy, how does the universe, or the fabric of reality, or whatever mechanical system governs outcomes, actually respond to us?
Well, this brings us to...
Because this feels like it leads directly to the oldest, most agonizing philosophical question in human history.
It does. It answers the perennial question that has troubled philosophers and theologians for centuries. Why do terrible, devastating things continuously happen to incredibly kind, self-sacrificing people?
Right. We all know the person we described at the beginning, the absolute angel. They give every ounce of their energy to everyone else. They are the living epitome of societal goodness, yet their life is a relentless, exhausting cascade of hardship, tragedy, and struggle.
Yeah.
It feels deeply, cosmically unfair. We desperately want to believe that the universe possesses an inherent sense of justice. We want to believe that virtue is meticulously tracked and eventually rewarded.
But the reality is that the universal fabric is utterly, completely impersonal. It possesses no moral compass whatsoever as human beings understand it.
None at all.
None. It is no respecter of persons. The mechanism of reality does not look down at the earth, point at a struggling individual and say, this person has a pure heart and they have suffered enough under the weight of others. Let me grant them a miraculous reprieve.
It doesn't work that way.
It does not operate like a benevolent judge. Conversely, it does not actively punish malice, nor does it reward martyrdom. It only reads one single, uncompromising language: frequency.
So all the governing mechanism sees is the combination of our dominant neurological state and our emotional energy. It doesn't see the polite deeds. It doesn't care that we baked cookies for the neighborhood block party.
Not at all.
It only sees the psychological vibration operating underneath those deeds.
Let's use a highly structural, metaphorical illustration to make the mechanics of this clear. The universe operates exactly like an infinite, hyper-efficient cosmic warehouse.
A warehouse.
It is a vast distribution center that simply processes orders. The intelligence operating this massive warehouse does not care in the slightest if the consciousness placing the order is a revered saint or a despised villain.
It's just fulfilling orders.
Exactly. It does not pause to judge the ethical purity or the moral history of the customer. It simply scans the energetic product code you are continuously emitting through your emotional state, and it faithfully, impartially, and ruthlessly ships the exact matching reality directly to your physical doorstep.
Okay, let's aggressively apply this warehouse mechanism to the angelic person experiencing continuous hardship. Let's look through this mechanical lens. If the cosmic warehouse scanner is just reading a product code, what exact code is the self-sacrificing good person constantly emitting?
This is the tragic, inescapable truth of the system. People identified by society as good almost always hold incredibly bad frequencies.
Let's break that down.
Let's examine what actually makes them good in the eyes of the collective. They are constantly worrying about the well-being of others. They live their entire lives in a chronic, elevated state of fear about upsetting the delicate social balance. They exist in perpetual draining survival mode, prioritizing everyone else's immediate needs to the point of total self-depletion. And above all, they carry an overwhelming, heavy burden of survivor's guilt over the general suffering of the world.
So their internal neurological landscape is completely defined by the emotions of fear, profound lack, chronic guilt, and absolute exhaustion. Even when they are smiling and helping someone, their internal engine is running on the fuel of depletion.
Exactly. So the scanner in the cosmic warehouse passes over them. It scans that heavy, survival-based, guilt-ridden emotional frequency.
And what does this see?
The digital readout on the scanner says fear, lack, suffering, exhaustion, and the entirely impersonal, highly efficient mechanism of the warehouse simply chimes and says, order received, processing. And it faithfully packages and delivers a material reality, perfectly filled with continued financial hardship, continued physical lack, and an endless stream of new situations requiring them to feel guilty and exhausted. It is a perfect, unyielding mechanical mirror of their internal state.
That is staggering. It completely dismantles the victim mentality. It means your perceived moral purity cannot manipulate the mechanics of reality.
Emancipation only begins.
Sorry, but emancipation only begins the absolute moment you realize that your internal suffering, your endless self-sacrifice, does not buy you a winning lottery ticket to a better life. In fact, your suffering is the exact mechanism placing the order for more suffering from the warehouse.
Yes, emancipation begins the exact second you stop relying on your virtue as a bargaining chip with the cosmos. The mechanism of reality does not negotiate. It reflects.
It reflects.
If you desire a physical reality characterized by immense abundance, absolute freedom, and extraordinary anomalous achievement, you must first generate the internal, unapologetic frequency of abundance, freedom, and extraordinary achievement.
And you can't do that if you're trying to please everyone.
It is mechanically impossible to generate that powerful frequency if you are constantly turning around, apologizing, and dimming your light to keep everyone in your vicinity comfortable. You have to willingly become the bad person who boldly, unapologetically places a massive order for an extraordinary life, completely regardless of who finds that order offensive.
So what does this ultimately mean for the person listening to this conversation right now if we synthesize all these complex threads? To actually materialize a reality that completely defies the statistical odds of your environment, you have to immediately cease doing the exhausting, thankless emotional labor of managing everyone else's comfort levels.
You must sever the parasitic social contract. You have to look incredibly closely at the terms of that invisible agreement, which demands your mediocrity in exchange for basic belonging, and you have to tear it to pieces.
You have to push completely past the powerful illusion of survivor's guilt. You have to recognize that your guilt is not a badge of empathy. It is merely the old reality's desperate, flailing immune response trying to pull you back into the familiar mud of the trench.
Exactly.
And instead, you must consciously, deliberately, and relentlessly generate a frequency of absolute, unapologetic design.
It requires hypervigilance. It is a daily, sometimes minute-by-minute choice. Every single thought you choose to entertain, every emotional reaction you allow to take root in your nervous system is a definitive choice between two entirely distinct timelines.
Two timelines.
At any given moment, you are either choosing the comfortable, heavily populated, predictable default timeline of the collective.
Or you are choosing the extraordinary, breathtaking, and often deeply isolating timeline of your true, limitless potential. It is the agonizing choice between staying safely tethered to the white picket fence or firing the engines and launching into the stratosphere.
And stepping into that stratosphere, sending beyond the noise, requires a profound, almost superhuman tolerance for silence. Which brings us to the ultimate final consideration of this entire exploration.
It brings us right back to the beginning, back to that boundless, magnificent dream we visualized in the very first moments of this discussion. The distant mirage that you finally figure out how to make real.
Hmm.
Let's say you actually do the work. If you successfully unbind yourself from the desperate infant need for conditional love, if you endure the freezing water, shed the heavy diving suit, completely ignore the societal hammer trying to strike you down, and you successfully ascend to the absolute glamorous pinnacle of your desired reality, standing there completely untethered from the crowd.
When the chaotic noise of conformity finally fades into nothingness, and you find yourself standing entirely alone in the vast, echoing space of your own fully materialized potential.
Who is the entity that ultimately greets you in that profound silence?